Hello and welcome back, everyone, to History 102 at JMU Summer of 2025 for the adult degree program. I am Joe Wilson. It's May 2nd, around 7:15 in the evening, and we are back for Lecture 8, Adam Smith and Capitalism. I am very glad to be back. I'm recording this a little later in the evening than normal. I'll tell you that for the first lectures that I've given so far, I've had a little bit of an audience. Let me give you a behind the scenes look into my life. Yes, I teach for JMU in Blue Ridge. This summer, I'm also working for the Girl Scouts and their camp out near Natural Chimneys, is driving for them, driving their campers to different places and picking them up at Dulles and bringing them to the camp. So I'm doing that. And for the last 3 weeks, my sister and her friend were staying with me in my little tiny one bedroom apartment, sleeping on a very nice air mattress I got them while they were preparing to move to California. They're selling our parents' old trailer. Both of them have died, and our father died in last August. There was a lot of tying up all the loose ends and everything and selling and all of that. And now they've left. So the last 3 weeks, as I was getting everything ready and recording some of the earlier lectures, those lectures I gave, well, they were sitting on my couch because I didn't want to go into my office. So I had a little bit of an audience. So I think one of the things you're going to find now with the lectures for the rest of the course is I might be a little bit looser in these lectures because I'm alone finally. And I don't feel like there are other people here. So when I'm alone, I can be a little bit looser. And hopefully, I don't waste time. Hopefully, I don't just ramble about. Yeah, there's a little behind the scenes thing. So if I feel a little bit looser now, it's because I don't have my older sister here. Maybe I felt like I was putting on a performance for my older sister, making sure everything was just right and proper and all of that. So now I don't have that here. Let's talk about Adam Smith. We'd been reviewing everything at the beginning of all these lectures, but I hope you see now that we're a little bit beyond now where we started. Where we talked about, well, what were things like before the Columbian Exchange? Well, now we're right in it now. These European powers have grown wealthy from exploiting all of these new territories that were unknown to them before the Columbian Exchange. Now that they're well known to them and they're interacting with these regions of the world, they're becoming quite wealthy. They've rediscovered knowledge that was lost to them during the long, dark period from the fall of the Roman Empire until this exchange, where they are now rediscovering the knowledge of the past. And the power of the Catholic Church is falling apart. And profane knowledge, non religious knowledge, is coming back to the forefront. And so much blood has been shed over this. So, coming into Adam Smith, we're in the 1700s now. We just talked about the culmination of all of that in the French revolutions and how Napoleon spread many of the ideas of this throughout Europe with his Napoleonic codes and his continental system. Excuse me. Oh, excuse me. And even though it was not long lived, it was really transformational throughout Europe, bringing many of the ideas of the Enlightenment to many of these monarchies. And even though he will ultimately be defeated and the Congress of Vienna will put these monarchs back on their thrones, and we'll see constitutional monarchies. The Pandora's box has been opened. And as we move forward, what we will begin to see is these constitutional monarchies become republics. But as you see, the Franco Anglo American ideas of the social contract, of republics, these are coming to fruition. So, to review, remember, coming into this period, the great English philosophers, Thomas Hobbes, who said, the state of nature is the state that humans live in, a war of all against all. That Thomas Hobbes didn't see humans as very different from the beasts of nature, God's other creations, that we live in a state where we must all fight for what we're going to get against one another. And he believed that to install order in humanity, we required a powerful ruler, a leviathan, a great and powerful monster whose rule is beyond challenge, so that they might instill order amongst humans and law. And remember John Locke, who, unlike Hobbes, who lived during the English Civil War, a time of bloodshed and violence, John Locke lived during the Glorious Revolution, when the House of Lords and the House of Commons, the Parliament, comes to preeminence in England, and they invite William of Orange, the Dutch nobleman, to come and be their constitutional monarch, with the understanding that he has very limited powers. And so John Locke says, no, humans aren't born into a situation where it is a state of war. No, we are higher than that. We are born with natural rights, the right to our own lives, the right to our own personal liberties, and the right to our own private property. These are rights we are born with, and we have the right of revolution. If our governments do not represent our rights, if they're not protecting our rights, we have the right to revolt against that government and install a new government that does protect our lives, our liberties, and our private property. And this was very influential, of course, on Thomas Jefferson. And as we saw with the rights of man and the citizen, Jefferson and Montesquieu and others are going to write that for the French Revolution. While all of this is going on, and you can compare to Hobbes and Locke, why does government exist? Hobbes says to protect us from destroying one another. Locke says, no, we're higher beings than that. The government exists because we create it, and it's representative of us to protect our rights. Hobbes says, where does sovereignty reside? What is it that makes power legitimate? Hobbes says legitimate power comes from the monarch, the Leviathan. Only the one ruler should have legitimate power, so that he can instill order amongst what Hobbes believes is disorder. Locke, on the other hand, says no, people are more enlightened than that, and that the legitimate rule arises from the power of the people coming together and forming that contract. Hobbes says the government's power is unlimited, that the Leviathan can control all aspects of society. Locke says no, government is actually quite limited and should only be used to protect those natural rights. All other things should go to the people. Can the people revolt against the government? Do they have a right of revolution? Hobbes says no. He says the Leviathan holds all power and you have no right to revolt against him. Locke says yes. If your government, because sovereignty arises from the people, is not protecting your life, your liberty, your property, then you have the right to revolt against that government and to replace it. So that's the political thought of this period in the West, in England. This is the English Enlightenment. If that's the political thought, where does power come from? Where does political power reside? Then where does economic power arise from? Let's think about this in true specific terms, not broad terms, but specific terms. Through all of these conquests, either through state funded expeditions, or as we learned, I touched on very slightly with the Dutch East India Company, where it was a coming together of personal financial interests, a company, a corporation. What is a corporation but a coming together of individuals and their personal fortunes to create a private economic entity for investments? So the Dutch East India Company, after they've gained, Holland has gained independence from Spain, are wealthy Dutch merchants who come together to form a corporation, an even larger conglomeration, a concern of investment overseas, of importing and exporting, and even able to invest in military ventures and building military ships and private armies to help them conquer. You understand? So the Dutch East India Company becomes almost a private, quasi military economic entity within Holland. You'll see this with the British East India Company. So, how does all of this begin to really form? Well, the basis of this is mercantilism. This was the economic school of thought coming out of the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance. This was a worldview, a perspective that all of the world's wealth was a zero sum game. All of the gold, all of the silver, all of the precious gems, all of the wealth of the nations of the world was finite. And all of the great nations had to compete amongst themselves to fight for this finite amount of wealth that existed in the earth. And before industrialism, what you have in Europe coming out of the Middle Ages is still sort of the apprentice and master workshop system, where all arts and crafts are done in workshops in urban centers. And to become a master craftsman, you must enter rather young and go through the whole apprentice and journeyman and master craftsman system. To fund those workshops, if you didn't have enough raw materials in your homeland, you needed to import them from your colonies. So the basis was, if you were going to found a colony overseas, the idea was to have raw materials, gold, silver, timber, iron ore, whatever it was that was available in that colony, shipped back to the mother nation where those raw materials could be produced as manufactured goods in the workshops. This was a very simple point of view. Again, in this simple worldview, and we're looking at Thomas Munn in the middle of the 1600s, he says it's very simple. And again, I am a history generalist. When I see this, and he talks about, says, look, all you've got to do is make sure that you're exporting more of your manufactured goods than you're importing, right? Keep a good balance of goods. As long as you're not spending more money on imports than you're making on your exports, and you're utilizing your farmland correctly, you're going to be doing well economically. The Romans could have told you this. You understand? When I study Rome, they know this. Trajan, the great imperial conqueror, he lamented the fact that the Romans were sending so much of their silver to India for luxury goods. They knew well that they had a terrible imbalance of trade, that they were sending too much of their silver and gold overseas in exchange for luxuries like cosmetics and gems and so forth. So, again, mercantilism. The gold and silver we can hoard in our treasury, make sure that we're exporting more than we're importing, and that our colonies overseas are sending us their rough goods, their raw materials, and that we are able to successfully manufacture them in our workshops. This is a very basic worldview. And it is predicated on the idea that there is a finite amount of wealth in this world, and we all must fight for what we get. You can sort of think of it sort of like Thomas Hobbes' view on politics as a state of nature. We must all fight for our slice of this pie. Moving into the 1700s, we're going to see a bit of what we'll call the Scottish Enlightenment, which is much more on economics. David Hume, he's an historian, a philosopher, and an economist, and he begins railing against mercantilism. He says we're thinking too small. He says if you consider wealth, think of it not as a finite resource. He says if we're only thinking of wealth as silver and gold and gems and natural resources that can be turned into what we can make in our workshops, then we're not really considering wealth as abstractly as we could. He says, if you think of all the whiskey in our distilleries here in Scotland and all the wool on the backs of our sheep as untapped economic resources, he says, then you could think of wealth almost like untapped resources. You could think of wealth like unending, almost like a pump that you could just go up to and keep pumping wealth out of. He says money, like coins, like currency, he says that's not wealth. You just stack it up in your account. He says money is more like grease. The currency that you carry in your wallet is not wealth. He says that's what helps grease the economy. He says currency shouldn't be hoarded, it should be spent. It's what helps move the wheels of the economy and helps generate more wealth. Money's there to be spent and to help move more wealth to more people. It helps generate trade. Money is not wealth. Wealth is commodities. He says if you think about the whiskey and the wool, they're not finite. You could continually build more and more distilleries and breed more and more sheep, and you could continually build more and more workshops to weave that wool into cloth and find more and more markets for your goods and continually expand your business. Who's listening to this? Who is his target audience? All of these merchants in Scotland and England and other parts of Europe. This is a new class of people coming out of the Middle Ages and into this Renaissance and Reformation and all of this. Who's getting wealthy? We just talked about the French Revolution and those first and second and third estates. Think about that throughout Europe in different ways. If it was the aristocracy who were the noblemen throughout Europe, their wealth was based in land ownership, as it has ever been. We could go back to the classical Greeks and Romans. How are you an aristocrat? Because you own a great deal of land. And that's traditional wealth, because land means agriculture. And the more food you can produce, the more you can sell, and the richer you'll get. We're moving out of an agricultural economy because they're reaching out all over the world now. And all the profits made from these long overseas trips are making new people rich, because it's not the aristocrats who are investing in this. We have nouveau riche, the new rich, and they're meeting together in their own guild halls, their own trading houses where these men are trading commodities, and they're enjoying new luxuries like coffee and tea and chocolate. And they're talking. Look at them in their wigs and their tricorner hats. And they're listening. How can we become even more wealthy? We are not members of the church who grew wealthy from lands and taxation. We are not members of the aristocracy. We are nouveau riche. We have become rich from investment in overseas shipping and trading of commodities. How can we become even more wealthy? David Hume is talking to them. By the middle of the 1700s, we see, of course, the Act of Union that has brought Scotland and Ireland into the British Empire. We see the American colonies, including Canada, all the way to the Mississippi River. We see British Honduras, which is today Belize. So we see Central America. We see the Sugar Islands of the Caribbean. We see their forts in Africa. And now they have taken Bengal. And we'll talk about that in another lecture. And they will only continue to expand into India. They will take Australia. They will only grow greater and greater from this period to be the greatest empire in the world. They are looking to expand. They have the greatest navy in the world. They have massive ships of the line, warships that after the Battle of Trafalgar during the Napoleonic Wars, this was fought off the coast of Portugal and Spain. Lord Nelson will die in this. Once they defeat that French fleet, they will not truly have a rival on the oceans of the world for about a century. They will dominate the oceans of the world. This, for example, is a Dutch merchant ship compared to these massive British warships that will dominate the seas. So, with the British dominating the oceans of the world, with them spreading their empire now that Spain and Portugal and Holland has gone through their periods, the French have been defeated. Let's talk about Adam Smith. Many people think Adam Smith is American. He is not. He is Scottish. This is part of the Scottish Enlightenment. He will publish a book in 1776, the same year as the American Revolution, an inquiry into the nature and the causes of the wealth of nations. He is a moral philosopher. He teaches at Oxford and at the University of Glasgow. He's very much interested in morality, much as Immanuel Kant was. And what he's going to write about the cause of wealth of nations, which is shortened to just the wealth of nations, he's concerned about human prosperity and how to create a better life for humans. Don't think of him as incredibly greedy. Think of him as seeing the way the world is going and trying to understand how to make it as beneficial for as many people as possible. Being a philosopher, he believes, based on his study, that capitalist markets will be much more dependable than relying on the old traditions or what Thomas Hobbes would prescribe as authoritarianism, as a commanded economy. He believes more like, let's say, John Locke, that people are inherently self interested, though Hobbes believes that as well, that people are motivated to do what is required of society because they want to be paid for it, guided by the profit motive. That because people will charge for their services, that is far more reliable a motivation than, let's say, an authoritarian commanding them to do it. He says that competition amongst all the different actors in society will regulate prices and greed. For example, multiple people offering the same services or products will offer them at different prices, and people that charge too much, people won't buy from them. They will buy cheaper. And if people are offering services or products that are of low quality, well, people won't buy those either. He says that goes also for wages, that people who are offering wages that are too low, people won't take those jobs. And if you are not a good worker, people will not hire you. So self interest and competition, he says, are far more dependable regulators of an economy than command, than having a king or a dictator simply publish a list of what the wages are and what the prices are, and that you're going to do it because that's what the king says it must be. He says it must regulate itself, that all the members of a free society should be free to run the economy in this way. He says that self interest will lead to communal prosperity, that the actors in this economy will have to adjust. If they think their price is too high and that's why things aren't working well, they'll have to lower them. If the quality of their goods is too low and that's why they're not selling well, they'll have to increase the quality of their goods. He says the way this market works depends on freedom. You cannot have a Leviathan in charge. It must be free. The actors within this market system must be free to pursue their self interests and to compete with one another. This is the quote that is very famous. Mankind has almost constant occasion for the aid of his brothers, and it is vain to expect this help only out of their good will. If you think of Confucius, Confucius focused on the idea that humans need to develop the characteristics of a benevolent gentleman, having goodwill and being very polite, having the best of social comportment. Not only must you have goodwill, but you must also carry yourself with great gravity and always treat others with great politeness. So, what is Adam Smith saying here? He says, we always have the opportunity to help other people, but it would be wrong of all of us, to expect help from other people because we know our lives. Life is hard. We have to work for everything that we get. And if we went around giving away everything that we had, then we'd be left with nothing. You understand? So, yes, we could go around giving everything we have to everyone who doesn't, but then we would be left with nothing. We know we can't. It's a balance, it has to be a balance. So he says, we will be far more likely to prevail and succeed if we can interest their own interest in my favor and show them that it is to their advantage to do what was required of me. What's he saying? It is not from the goodwill of the butcher or the brewer or the baker that we expect our dinner, but in regard to their own self interest. What he's saying is the butcher, the brewer, the baker, they're not bad people, but they have a life, they have a home, and they have a family, and they've got to take care of them too. So we must expect that we take care of each other, and we do it by supporting each other, by buying and selling from one another. And we must be able to hold each other accountable by saying, look, if I don't like your bread, if I don't think it's any good, I got to go buy bread from someone else who charges a fairer price for a fairer product. It cannot be a command economy where the government issues bread and you've got to take it or leave it. He says, no, it's got to be competition amongst everyone in society. He says, supply and demand is going to regulate prices and profits. If there is a great demand for something, then the producers are going to supply it. But if there's a great demand and there's not much of it, well, then the price is going to go up because it's of scarcity. There is a scarcity of it. So the price will go up. However, if you've produced way too much of something and nobody wants it, well, you're going to have to sell it at a really low price just to get rid of it. So he says the invisible hand is something in this economy that's going to regulate it. He says you don't need any human intervention in this. He says that that's going to work itself out. You make too little, high demand, it's going to, and low supply, it's going to change things up. Further, he says wealth is something that can grow and grow and grow and grow. It is not finite. And he says, what you men who are collecting all of this wealth from overseas trade should do is you should invest it into growing your manufacturing. The big example he uses is what are called either Dazzler or Fascinator pens for ladies' hats in his period. He says women pin their hats to their hairdo with these big, long, fancy, ornate pins. He says, imagine you own a workshop that makes these pens that are very um, fashionable and expensive, and you'd like to sell these to these ladies. He says, okay, imagine you have a worker, and it takes him a certain amount of time to uncoil the wire that these pins are made of, and then he's got to cut each length of wire to the length of the pin. Then he's got to sharpen the end of it and polish it. And then he's got to take the terminal of the pen that is so fancy, and he's got to polish it and cut the ribbon and tie it real fancy in the feather. And so maybe in the course of a day, if he does it each step at a time, he might make 6 or 7 of those. But let's say instead of that, he cuts a whole bunch of wires at once and sharpens a bunch of wires at once and does each step. Maybe over the course of the week, if you, but let's say you hire 7 or 8 guys, and each one of them spends all day just doing one step. Imagine how many pins you could make in a day. He says if you break up each step along the manufacturing process and have a worker specialize in just one step of that manufacturing, he says you're going to be able to produce an enormous amount of products, and it's going to lead to innovations. He says this growth is going to come from management. He says you have to break down the manufacturing process, have specialized laborers so that you can create mass production. How is this going to help? Because with all of this, you think, okay, well, you're going to drive down prices. He says, no. He says, you're going to have to open up markets. All of these markets around the world that you all have been conquering and exploring and bringing resources out of, you're going to have to start selling to them too. He says, with the growth of productivity, with the growth of manufacturing, and with all of these markets, you're going to be able to sell all over the world. And with this wealth is going to come freedom. You will be personally free. And this mercantilist idea should go away, that you can produce wealth. It's not finite. You can produce wealth and you can replicate this sort of thing in all sorts of arenas. He says this is a societal good. And he uses the French philosophical term laissez faire. He says, leave it alone. He says, don't try to play with it. He says, don't put regulations on it. He says, don't let any sort of Leviathan try to come in and control it. Don't put any laws on it. He says, leave it be. He would not, and when I say I mean Adam Smith, would not be in favor of most of the regulations that you see today. He would be absolutely against buyouts. If your business fails, your business fails. That's what he was about. You succeed and you fail. The market dictates it. If your business goes out of business, if your business goes bankrupt, your business goes bankrupt. If your business succeeds like gangbusters, he would put no restrictions on it. He says the market decides what succeeds and what fails. The people will decide. He was not for unions. He would have hated monopolies. He wanted competition, as much competition as possible. He says, all of this money that you accumulate, reinvest more businesses. He says you can continue to generate wealth. Why is he so interested in this? because he believed that the more wealth a society generated, the richer all of its citizens would become, so that even those who were at the lowest rungs of that society, their life would become better as well, even if it wasn't as good as those at the very top. It's sort of like the saying, a rising tide raises all boats. So he was not the sort who was an egalit or uh, what am I trying to say? He was not a social elite. He was not in favor of, a snobbish rich class. He truly was searching for ways to generate as much wealth as possible to lift a society up as a whole. He was concerned with labor, and he wanted to see that labor get as high wages as possible. And he truly believed that under capitalism, that was the case, that they would have the highest wages possible. He believed that societal progress was inevitable with capitalist progress. He was optimistic. He believed that competition was best for an economically successful society. Capitalism is not a political theory. It's not about ruling people. It's about how to run your economy. It's about a hands-off approach and allowing the people in your state run the economy themselves without government intervention in a free society. And it's Adam Smith's direct advice towards investment in manufacturing, a manufacturing economy. I know this is a bit short, but it's important because what else is happening in 1776? The American Revolution. Well, what else is happening in 1776? Edward Gibbon produces and publishes The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Why is that important? Well, Edward Gibbon is a British citizen. He is a self-trained, excuse me, he is a self-trained armchair historian, part of the ruling classes. When we get into our next lecture on the first industrial revolution, what we're going to see is a transformation of society into an industrial society. And one of the things coming out of that industrial society is a rising, educated middle class, a bureaucratic class. In the 1800s, you're going to see a far more educated, bureaucratic middle class. And the foundations of many of the academic disciplines that you see studied at universities today. So while Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire is really a seminal work in that field, it's sort of one of the last amateur armchair endeavors, and moving into the 1800s, we're really going to get more academic research into many of the fields that up until now have been the primary concern of a handful of very rich people. So things are changing. All right. I've talked a lot. I hope you got something out of this. And when we come back, It's the Industrial Revolution.